Marc's MK7 GTI review of the cold air intake from Integrated Engineering. Basically, it's just an air. It's a new intake, big fatty, 3 or 3.5 inch inlet pipe. It's pretty awesome, and you'll hear it in about a second. But you can certainly hear the turbo blow off. So you can hear it pretty good, and it's really funny because really at the end of the day, all the crap that modern day cars have in the engine bay quiets the engine, which is a bit sad because it's a turbo and you want to hear what it's doing. And so when you put on an air intake aftermarket, you remove a lot of the sound damping that happens, and as a result of that, you get a lot more enjoyable of a car to drive because you can actually hear things. Now that's if it's your cup of tea. This is kind of tasteful, gotta be honest. It's not too loud on everyday driving. Right now we're at 1500, 1600 RPM, going 52. You don't hear anything. It's mostly because the turbo is not really doing much and the engine isn't really sucking in that much air. If you really push it, you can hear it, and you can hear that the valve opening for the excess pressure when you let off the gas. When you shift, it doesn't happen so much, and I think that's just due to the fact that the DSG direct speed gearbox from Volkswagen is just so fast at shifting with the two different clutches that really at the end of the day, the engine is basically programmed to release the turbo pressure right back into the air intake, and that happens when you let off the gas. You'll hear it here, but that happens when you let off the gas. But the truth is that if you just shift up, like I'll show it now. So we're in fourth, accelerate. That's fifth. You don't hear it as much. And I think the reason why is just because the direct speed gearbox is so fast at shifting that the engine can accelerate through the gears, which you wouldn't do in a normal stick shift because, you know, you've got the plates uncoupling and coupling back. So the direct speed gearbox allows you to just continuously, you know, accelerate with the engine, which means that I'm not so sure that the pressure release from the turbo really kicks into gear when shifting. Really, it only probably happens when you let off the gas, and when you let off gas, you can hear it. Now, I noticed when I was putting the turbo in or the air intake in last night that with my buddy Scott, that it seems like this has a recirculation of the excess air from the pressure release from the turbo when you let off, or when you just don't want. Basically, you have a throttle body, it allows air to go into the engine. It's like a flap, and you know your turbo's building up pressure, more pressure than normal naturally aspirated engine air that goes into the engine. And so when you close those plates like this, you don't want a pressure to smack into them. So what actually happens is it closes, pressure starts to build up, and it releases out of a valve. Now, in a lot of turbo cars, it's just called a turbo blow-off valve, like BPV. Well, it's pressure release valve, but BOV, blow-off valve, yeah, I guess. And that just vents to air. So basically when the pressure builds up and excess compressed air needs to go somewhere, it just leaves the engine completely. And so you hear like really cool sounds, right? Like, those ultra ricey cars that, that first sound that is the release of that pressure, and the second sound is the winding down of the turbo. Sometimes there's a spool that's part of the pressure release, I guess, but not my cup of tea. And this integrated engineering intake is great, because basically at the end of the day it just removes all the gunk that they put inside an engine bay in modern day cars that takes up all the space, and ultimately really kills the sound. So when you put an air intake on like this, I did not do any kind of recirculation or whatever delete thing for the turbo blow off valve, or recirculation. That means that I didn't change how that's going to sound. It sounds exactly the same, actually. The difference is that you're just removing crap from the engine bay that blocks it. So the stock air box, all that kind of stuff just really kills the sound, and that sucks. So removing it allows you to hear what's happening in your engine bay a little bit more, and that for me is wonderful. It's not for everybody. I'd say out of probably, I used to have a 2008 GTI with a K&N air intake, and that was loud, to be honest. Even though I didn't do anything with a blow-off valve or anything like that, or pressure release, you could hear it a lot more than you could hear this one on almost all rev ranges, which was kind of annoying, to be honest. It was fun, but it got kind of annoying. This one, I gotta say, from Integrated Engineering, I think it's their MK2, is nice. It's tasteful. It's there when you want it. It's not when you don't, meaning when you're not really accelerating hard or anything like that. Anything up to 2K RPM before the turbo's really doing very much, you don't really hear much. And it's actually pretty fun, because in a way, it's actually an audio reminder of how to save gas. Because if you're keeping it below 2K and you're not aggressively accelerating, you don't really hear much of what's going on, and that also tends to invariably increase your fuel economy, because you are not, pushing so hard on the throttle and, doing the, mixing in the fuel in the air as much, and thus saving fuel. So yeah, overall, I gotta say, about $350, super easy install, except when you're me and Scott and you shoot coolant all over the place from your engine, yeah, it's a pretty great mod, I gotta admit. I think it was a fun purchase for sure. I'm really happy with it. I'm particularly happy with it because it's not my first rodeo to putting in an air intake, and I think that it's a lot more tasteful than what you get if you go a bit cheaper. It's not cheap. I haven't really driven it enough to say that it really changes anything, but I can say that I have a feeling that the throttle response is a little bit better. I've got a JB4 on here, so that's already with a Map 1 tune, so that's a piggyback, so that's already increasing how much pressure the turbo can make, which invariably means that it probably wants more air. So whereas a regular air intake may give you something like 5, 10, maybe 12 horsepower, this and some torque, this probably gives more, just because it's allowing less restriction to the pre-existing turbo, but that turbo is now allowed to build up more pressure. So, if you think of the engine as a black box with an in and an out, it's really just an air pump. Any engine is. you know, I've changed what goes into the engine now, right? So I've got a JB4 that changes how high the turbo pressure can go. It remaps fuel, so it gives it extra fuel for the extra amount of air that's in there, so it combusts properly. And then now I have an air intake that relieves some of that, you know, friction related to air coming in, and also you know, just increases the total amount of air coming in. And so that's that inlet part of that black box. And realistically speaking, you know, the only mod that I could do now that would kind of balance that equation, if that was an equation, so to speak, a little bit better, would be to change, you know, the downpipe, because the downpipe is where the engine spits the exhaust gases after the turbo back out. And if that's restricted, it means that the engine, you know, if you think of a column of air, that column of air that's in the pipe has to be pushed out. So, you know, you have a catalytic converter in there and a whole bunch of other stuff, which creates restrictions also. But think of that column of air, and you know, moving that column of air out of the way, and the total amount of back pressure that you have. Bigger pipe is going to allow you to have a lower density of air that's going out of that pipe for a given, you know, pop in the engine and blowing it all out, which means that you have less back pressure on the engine, which means that the engine will tend to, you know, respond better and more, you know, throttle response, things like, you know, accelerating and all that is better. And at the same time, you know, ups your power a little bit because the engine is not losing any power due to just basically trying to push stuff out of the way. It's less resistance at the end of the day. So that's something that I could do. You know, I'm not sure that I would really want to. You know, they make ones with, you know, catalytic converters that are like high flow, which basically, you know, you meet all your emissions inspection requirements and everything, but, you know, it's really great. You basically, it's I guess a new thing. I don't know. Haven't paid in or read much about modifying cars or anything, but I don't think, you know, high performance catalytic converters was a thing in the 70s or 80s or whatever. But, you know, now it's pretty easy to make, advanced manufacturing methods and blah blah blah. So I could do that, but I'm not sure that I'm necessarily going to, because that is more expensive. It's like $500. Maybe I'll buy that when this car is completely out of warranty. But as far as I understand, that actually doesn't void anything on your warranty. You can basically just put it on. The air intake doesn't either. You can take it off, so that's no big deal. And the JB4 is just a piggyback, so I haven't changed anything with how the ECU runs. Yeah, overall, thing's pretty cool. You know, I don't know if you can hear it when it's in park. Yeah, you can. And then now I'm going to actually show you what it looks like from the engine bay. Pop the hood. So it's this bad beast right here. And that's the inlet pipe. It goes over to this guy. And the turbo is all the way back there. So you can see that's just a massive air filter. Way bigger than what I had before. And then this is the heat shield. This guy's pretty cool. It basically lines up with these inlets here, so it kind of rams that air over into this area, which is kind of nice. Overall, pretty nice. I gotta say, I like it.